Hello and welcome back to Coinscrum Markets for our regular Friday wrap. As always, joined by Nick Mancini, Chief Community Officer at tradethechain.com. Hi Nick, early morning for you in Denver, 6:30.
Yeah, very early morning, but happy to be here. I got to be up to watch the markets. You know, things don't sleep, so I don't get much either.
I didn't realize you actually slept anyway, full stop. So, okay, good to know that you get some. Ending a relatively quiet week in the market. We'll come on to review what you were suggesting last week might happen, which was kind of slightly sitting on the fence because there wasn't anything that clear. But we'll come on to that. Before we do, it's been quiet in the news, really. Anything that stood out for you?
Yeah, a couple of weird things. Nothing that was really pushing price in either direction. We kind of expected some volatility, but we didn't get any news that was overtly bullish or bearish. So a lot of our news that we're going to talk about today fits in kind of the neutral category since it didn't really affect price, although future implications of the news could be important. So the first one is probably Fidelity holding talks with the SEC in regard to their Bitcoin ETF application. So anyone who's been following the Bitcoin ETF application saga for 3-4 years now, the SEC won't make a ruling. They won't really meet with people. They won't be very specific in their guidelines. So the fact that Fidelity kind of had a closed door meeting is one of those perk your eyebrows and say what's going on, or is Fidelity going to get one? Is the SEC being more specific? So there's a lot of questions around this, and especially everyone else who filed for a Bitcoin ETF is, got binoculars or, their magnifying glass out because they want to meet with the SEC too, So this is a very interesting development in that saga. Doesn't really get us any closer. It doesn't really mean anything, but it's one of those things where it's like, is the SEC getting closer? Are we getting farther? It's one of those bigger question mark kind of headlines. Moving forward, we had Coinbase filed for futures trading. So, Coinbase is continually adding to their product stack. So, obviously exchange, I believe they do custody. I would be shocked if they weren't dipping into some prime brokerage. So to see them doing futures trading is natural, but it's also an expansion, which is when the CFTC and the SEC and everyone else start to kind of say, the SEC has already got their problems with Coinbase's lending product. Now they want to be a futures exchange. So too many products can create, the idea of a lack of competition in the market. So it's going to be interesting to see what Coinbase gets approved for and denied for now that they're trying to expand products.
Yeah, I mean,
so that's a very interesting one.
Yeah, it's been something new. Well, I guess that's sort of trying to head off at the pass, what we spoke about last week with FTX acquiring LedgerX, getting into the futures game in the US.
Yes.
It's always been a question for me. A lot of these firms coming in and trying to do everything was potentially going to cause an issue, trying to be all things to all men, which is, we tend to have more segregation in traditional markets. So yeah, it's interesting to see what, as you said, they're already confronting the SEC on one side of things, and I guess they'll be dealing with the CFTC on the futures side. They've generally been quite supportive of the industry over the years, the CFTC. So hopefully they'll have more success there. And just looping back to Fidelity, as you mentioned, a whole number of people have been putting applications in over the years. Now we're seeing kind of more of the traditional market incumbents stepping into the space. More recently we saw ICAP announce, their move into the space. I don't know. Do we think that the regulators, especially in the US, will give more of a friendly ear to the guys that they've kind of dealt with over the years and kind of build a little bit more trust and around them?
I think so. I think what we're going through right now is less of just the regulators kind of throwing the stink eye at certain people. I think it's just more what's in their jurisdiction and what isn't. So they're not going to go off after FTX because FTX is located in a different country. Coinbase is really the only international exchange that has their tentacles deep in US soil, and they're not going to go after the small fish because Coinbase is obviously the biggest leader right now. Why take Kraken down when Coinbase does triple the volume? So I think it's just a matter of where the SEC can reach first and they're just grabbing onto the first and biggest thing possible, and they're bring that down or kind of drag that with us. And I think that's kind of what's going on. I think you're 100% correct about the CFTC. The head of the CFTC has actually kind of openly sparred with the head of the SEC a bit on, I think, social media or in the media waves, kind of just saying, I think he specifically said Bitcoin is not under the SEC's jurisdiction. Like, he said something very specific to that nature, which is a bit shocking. So we are seeing a bit of a difference in opinion between the CFTC and SEC as well, and in the outlook for these emerging markets as well. So another storyline to continue to watch. Yeah,
well, I guess from Bitcoin and crypto's perspective, it's better to be wanted than not wanted. So let them spar over it.
If you have haters, right, you're doing something right. I guess that's the old saying. So
yeah, exactly. So you said there wasn't a huge amount of kind of market moving news this week. I guess a couple of small highlights. Litecoin had a bit of a pump. What was that about?
Yeah, so that was interesting, and that's that spike that you'll see in the price chart, like that weird kind of just up and down within the same hour, it seems. That was when Walmart and the Litecoin partnership hoax came out. So I put this as neutral because you can make a bullish case and you can make a bearish case. Bullish case is that crypto is in the news internationally no matter what. So how is that a bad thing? No news is bad news in the media world, right? But then the bearish news is that now Litecoin is associated with the most recent news Litecoin is associated with a hoax. So if anyone goes to look into it, that's the first thing they'll see, which is negative for outlook long term. So there's two ways to spin it. Either way, this got washed out of the news cycle very quickly. It caused a huge spike and a very topsy-turvy sentiment kind of day. But other than that, it's water under the bridge at this point. And now the media is going to be double and triple checking fact sources moving forward, which isn't entirely a bad thing either.
Okay. Well, and there's one token network that had called our attention in the last couple of months, caught many people's attention. Solana had a very strong bull run since July. It was getting a little bit carried away. It already started pulling back, and we saw a bit of an issue there, didn't we?
Yeah, so this is something that's a little bit more technical for me to understand just because I have not dug into the Solana ecosystem. But the grand scheme of things is basically the Solana had an outage due to basically capacity overload. Allegedly, they got up to 400,000 transactions per second, which I think just like murders Visa's capabilities. So allegedly, Solana was at peak condition before the issue. But regardless, after I believe 2 days of issues, everything was resolved. I think Solana kind of came out with a big statement. The very interesting part about this is just what's going to happen with Solana's long-term outlook. Will they be able to kind of market themselves away from this? Will FTX and Alameda Research step in to help with Solana long-term? Will they bring on more auditors? Will they bring on more developers? What they do to move past this rather than just say patched is going to be very telling for, I think, the future of Solana. Because most people have said this is probably the best bet to take down Ethereum in the near term because ADA is just getting started with smart contracts and that takes a while. So, pardon me. I think this is very interesting, and it's something I'm not bearish on Solana. I have not sold any of my Solana personally, but I do think that the argument for ETH killer or ETH competitor just got a chip on its shoulder and is going to need a lot of work in the near future.
Yeah. Well, as I said, it already pulled back from its highs at around $215. Yep. I think it'd come back down to about 160, 165, and it had a little impact. It does. It's surprising sometimes, isn't it? You don't see some of this quite critical news, and the impact isn't that big. I mean, it's sold off a little bit, maybe another 10% since then. But historically, we've seen a number of networks, have bugs post-launch, had issues, caused a little bit of, disruption in the very near term. ultimately they got fixed, they get patched, and they move on. So, no different here. Ethereum's had the same, Bitcoin's even had the same in the past as well. So I think these things are being developed in real time. These things are going to occur. It's how they address them and how they move on. So at the moment, the market's saying it's not too concerned. So we'll see.
Yep. They are building in public. They did claim it's a beta. They didn't claim perfection, but we do want to see stability. So
yeah, I guess so. So look, let's move on to some charts and see how this is affecting sentiment and technicals going forward. As always, let's start with looking at the Bitcoin sentiment chart here.
Yeah, so as you can see in relation to the price action that we discussed over the past week, sentiment was very topsy-turvy. You saw right around the same 2-day span in which that kind of Litecoin news began to become a rumor, then began to permeate, then began to become disproven. You can see the massive sentiment kind of variance throughout that 2-day span. And then it gets to be exactly like price action, very choppy. So great for a day trader, great for a swing trader. You short when it's at resistance, you go long when it's at support. I've been having definitely some fun the past few days. But obviously it's not going to just sit here in the range and just chop around the whole time. So what's it going to do next? Right now, we're heading into the weekend looking a little bit more bearish than I would have probably liked. But history does tell us that the best buys are usually at when Bitcoin is the most bearish in terms of sentiment. So I've already started to place a couple of longs just for the day as we begin to ladder down prior to the US Open. But I think going into the weekend, what we're going to be looking for is a round sentiment bottom. And then once that starts rounding, I think I'm going to start going a little bit longer in terms of my types of trades, just based on where we've recently gone. Every time sentiment really starts to find that round bottom, price does seem to have a little bit of fun. So I'm going to be tracking that very closely. Trading volume is a little bit down compared to what we've usually seen going into the weekend, but I don't consider that to be a terribly bad thing. I think Bitcoin could use a bit of a low volume, high volatility weekend to kind of shake us out of whatever formation we're in. We'll discuss that in the technicals. But I think right now is if you're not experienced or you're unsure, probably step away from the charts this weekend. But if you are a great trader or very sure or confident in what you're doing, then this is probably a very good volatile weekend to pump some trades in.
Okay. And how's that reflected on the Ethereum chart, the Ethereum sentiment chart here?
Well, I think it's very similar. Even though we're going to talk about dominance later, I think Bitcoin and Ethereum have been moving very similar in terms of just basic price action. So if Bitcoin has a drop, then Ethereum does too. But I think Ethereum has been slightly more bullish in the near term than Bitcoin has. When we discuss dominance, we're actually going to see a bit of a rise from both of them. But Ethereum has been more profitable in the near term than Bitcoin has. We discussed this last week. So I think that actually may flip soon. But basically where we're looking at now in terms of sentiment is very similar to Bitcoin. Topsy-turvy, volatile. You can see sentiment didn't kind of break out of the same range for the entire week. We had the same humps. We had the same troughs. It looks like that's going to probably be the case again this weekend. But as you can see, even with that volatile sentiment, we're still moving to the upside. Bitcoin and Ethereum are still inching higher, even though they just made a lower high this morning. So we're hoping that those lower highs end up on that support level and that sentiment starts to round out again at a good time, which creates opportunity for a good trade. So Ethereum and Bitcoin, I would not be surprised to move more or less hand in hand this weekend.
Okay, so nothing massively clear from those.
No.
But is there anything on the technical charts that might be giving us some firmer indication? Let's start with the Bitcoin technical chart.
Yep.
Last week, you put caveats in, you were slightly bullish, put caveats in that, it could still as equally have a little bit of a pullback. I think, we didn't get the strength, but the support levels, I think, acted well and came into play. So, yeah, what's this telling us now?
Yeah, so what was interesting about last weekend is we discussed the kind of buy on Friday, sell on Sunday phenomenon. And actually, if you would have bought on Friday and sold at the same time Sunday, you would have been about even. And then Monday, we kind of had a big boost. which is very interesting. But of course, you know, what is fortunate in the analysis is that our support levels held. The middle line kind of neutral chop level was exactly what happened. So even if you did make a trade, you probably did not end up too bad over the weekend. You more or less were even. So what our outlook for this weekend is what it looks to be forming is a textbook bull flag or bull pennant, you know, depending on exactly how you want to call it. But basically that pull that moves up at a 45-degree angle, we come down with some consolidation, more usually slightly to the downside, and then we generally push up higher after a few days or hours of volatility. So in the most bullish scenario, that like being if sentiment rounds out like we think it will, then Bitcoin should move up to the center of the trading range, hopefully end up flipping that to supports, and then continue higher to the top of the trading range, like where it was before we had the kind of the black swan event the other week. So that is the goal, and you're going to see a lot of Twitter traders and kind of, you know, all the Twitter personalities are probably going to be calling for this trade. We've already seen it happening a lot. So then the reason why I say be careful is because when too many people are in a trade, it becomes crowded, and crowded trades get usually hurt by savvy whales and leverage traders. So just be careful when you see too many people. In the worst case scenario, like let's say this does come to fruition, but a whale battles it back after everyone gets too bullish near resistance, then we come right back down to more or less where we are, or previous resistance, which is at the bottom of the trading channel. In the worst case scenario, I think this is highly unlikely, but obviously we do have a red candle printed, so we do need to be aware. We would drop back down immediately to the bottom of the trading range, and then we would more or less find support around 43K before figuring out the next move. So that's what the Bitcoin technicals look like. Clearly, we're going into the weekend a little bit more bearish on sentiment, but I have a feeling that we're likely going to round out with this confluence of the 200 moving average and the 100 moving average, as well as a lot of order book interest at this level. So that's my opinion on Bitcoin's future price movement.
Well, we all thank you for it. Let's switch chart, or have we switched chart? I don't know. It looks like the same chart. Ethereum Technicals seems to be tracking pretty much what Bitcoin's been doing over the last week or so. Should we just kind of rinse and repeat what you said for Bitcoin, or is there something else that you're spotting here?
More or less. I think so. I think the interesting thing about Ethereum is that it will likely be more volatile, but it will also be more profitable in the short term. So that's just something to be very aware of. As you can see, Ethereum's movements, especially in the near term, are much more violent than Bitcoin's were in the same time frame. So we just had that big drop down to the confluence of the 100 moving average and the 200 moving average. And we're kind of forming what looks to be a rough inverse head and shoulders, which is a bullish formation. We're also bouncing at that support level. We've got a lot of order book interest. Obviously, sentiment was a bit more bullish on Ethereum than it was Bitcoin. But I think more or less at the end of the day, we're going to see them move hand in hand, and as they have been after that black swan event that happened the other week. So if Bitcoin continues to move higher and show some strength, then I expect Ethereum to move with it, more or less the exact same movement. So, you know, center of the trading range, hopefully we flip that into supports, move higher to the top of the trading range to continue basically at the same pace that we've been continuing on for the past few months. We're, you know, not so good scenario is that we get a bit of a spark here, head to the top of or head to the center of the trading range, and then have some volatility continually within the range, basically as we have had the past week. The worst case scenario, we beeline to the bottom of the trading range, and then we end up somehow around 3K if that breaks. So again, I don't think that the bearish scenario is going to happen. I don't think that we're going to see the ultra bullish scenario, meaning top of the trading range in the exact near term. But I do think that we are likely to at least head to the center of the trading range this weekend with some volatility around. But crazier things have happened, especially when crypto Twitter starts getting super, super bullish. So it's best to never play the ultra bullish, always better to play conservative and be careful. But you know your options now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess over the last few weeks, looking at Bitcoin and Ethereum in isolation has been slightly more challenging. I mean, when it's got to, it's been within these channels. So I guess that's given us some clues. What does seem to have been more indicative is, their moves relative to each other, Bitcoin against Ethereum and versus all the other alts as well. So these have been interesting the last few weeks, the dominance charts. Let's start with the Bitcoin dominance charts down at this kind of strong support line, bounced off there, back in above the middle line as well. What are we looking at?
Yeah, so we've been following these exact same trend lines, I want to say since July, and we have bounced off of the lower bound supports in what, 2 months? That's it's a bit kind of crazy how times can quickly change in just that short amount of time. So what does this mean, and what kind of happened the last week? So when we were talking last week, we were just kind of touching the bottom trend line, meaning that Bitcoin dominance was nearing a final support level. It touched and it did bounce back up. So what we did not expect, and I did preface last week that I would expect Ethereum and altcoins to be stronger than Bitcoin. That was actually more or less the case. Bitcoin did have a nice run, but so did majority of altcoins and Ethereum at the same time. So we were still proven right, but I did not expect Bitcoin to recover this much dominance within, I think, less than a week's amount of time. So that is a pretty decent, significant, or I mean, it's about a percentage point, a little bit more than a percentage point, which is pretty solid. And now it's above the trend line, which means that it's officially kind of back at another support level that it's going to have to break down again. So it does look like Bitcoin is showing some strength in the near term, which is going to be interesting to watch out for.
Yeah, it is. And likewise, if we move on to the Ethereum one, equally solid support, bounced off that last week. So we're just, tell us what you think we're going to do from here.
Yep. So last week we did discuss that it was, I generally do not like to short whenever it is touching support like that, especially after it's had so many bounces. I said that I would probably go long on this chart, and if I traded it up until today, I would have been in profit. So that does mean that, and obviously if you were trading Ethereum last week, Ethereum had a pretty decent week. So if you were in Ethereum, you probably were very happy. I think moving forward, it needs to basically find a support level around where it currently is, or around that 50 moving average. If it does not, it will certainly come back to the bottom of the trend, and will need to bounce again like it did kind of in that same July formation. See how it popped up and then it came back down and then it shot right back up to the very top again. It needs to perform that maneuver if it currently breaks down. So what I'm seeing right now is that there's a potential for it to catch and move higher. I wouldn't exactly bank my life on it. So if I'm trading Ethereum this weekend, I am being a much more careful trading Ethereum than I am trading Bitcoin this weekend, and probably into early next week.
Right. Okay. And then finally, to finish up, we'll look at the others dominance, how all the other alts are performing against Ethereum and Bitcoin.
So others dominance had a bit of a drop, obviously, today. I think a lot of kind of alts are recovering after just massive run-ups. So, but I think the interesting part about this is we've been following this since I want to say at least August. We started covering others dominance, but we had that massive bounce off support. We moved higher. Alts have been absolutely killing the game. And when you talk about such a small populace of coins moving up nearly 2% in dominance level, like Bitcoin moved up in 1%, we were shocked. And you saw what Bitcoin did percentage-wise, which wasn't very crazy. And now you're seeing basically a 2% rise since we last spoke in terms of others well, not 2% still, but 2% at its height rise. It is pretty shocking, and it is very demonstrative of altcoins rise recently and why they've been, prolific in terms of just price action and price appreciation. So what it looks like to me, what's happening now is obviously it is hitting its resistance, which is around that 15. I probably should have drawn this line, my apologies, but you can see that based on the other levels, last time it came around the 15% range, it was rejected 3 times and only went above it once. So clearly this is a tough area for the bullish others dominance traders. But we would look to see support around the 14% flat level or high 13%. So it does look to me like your favorite altcoins may not have their best week, but that does not mean there might be some outliers. I think like Polkadot seems to be one L1 that hasn't gotten enough love as the other ones. That may be something to look into, but the majority of altcoins are likely to not perform as well as Bitcoin or potentially Ethereum based on these series of charts.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, we've said Polkadot maybe lagged behind, but some of the others, you mentioned Solana before, maybe the issues
ADA.
of the network, they really had sort of what looked like blow off tops, at least in the intermediate term. To do with resetting a little bit. So I think that's being displayed here in this chart, and maybe there's more of that kind of softness to come as well from those. Excellent, Nick, as always. Let's see. Yeah, we kind of, you said some indicators here. Nothing's showing anything massively indicative, but so maybe people need to exercise some caution. Don't go all in on anything. Trade safely out there. Nick, you trade safely too. Go back to bed, get another hour's sleep, and then we'll see you next week.
All right, Paul, thanks so much for the time, and you have a great week as well.
Okay, so I'm going to